tonight, everything changes. A documentary about Melania Trump has dropped, and the numbers, the reactions, the behind-the-scenes secrets, they're shocking. From untold struggles inside the White House to decisions and tensions that nobody has ever seen, this film reveals a side of the First Lady the world thought they knew but didn't. Panic is spreading in media circles, critics are debating every frame, and viewers are asking the same question: what was really happening behind the cameras? Stay with us, because in the next few minutes, you'll see the truth, the conflicts, and the hidden moments that could rewrite the story of Melania Trump forever. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, share your review in the comments, and make sure to watch the video till the end so you don't miss anything important. The room was silent as the final numbers flashed across the screen, and for a brief moment, even the reporters seemed unsure how to react, because what they were seeing wasn't just disappointing, it was shocking, the kind of result that makes insiders exchange worried glances and executives start whispering urgently behind closed doors. And this was the moment many say changed everything, when the long-anticipated documentary centered on Melania Trump revealed what some are now calling nightmare figures. Numbers so far below expectations that panic quietly began spreading through political media circles, production teams, and even among those who had once believed the project would reshape public perception entirely. For months, anticipation had been carefully built, trailers teasing never-before-seen moments, promotional clips hinting at emotional depth, personal struggle, and a rare behind-the-scenes look into the life of one of the most private first ladies in modern American history, and insiders promised it would humanize Melania, show her strength, and offer a new narrative beyond headlines. But when the documentary finally dropped and the early viewership data rolled in, it painted a drastically different picture, one that suggested audiences were either uninterested, unconvinced, or possibly exhausted by political storytelling tied to the Trump name. Sources close to the production later described the atmosphere as tense and almost surreal, as if everyone involved had expected a major breakthrough, but instead faced an uncomfortable reality. Because the investment was massive, the promotion aggressive, and the expectations sky high, yet the public response failed to match the hype, leading analysts to immediately question whether the narrative had missed its mark or whether broader fatigue toward political personalities was beginning to dominate viewer behavior in ways no one fully anticipated. What made the situation even more intense was how quickly reactions started pouring in across social media and news commentary platforms, with some viewers expressing curiosity but little emotional connection, others criticizing the storytelling as overly controlled and polished, and some suggesting it felt less like a documentary and more like a carefully managed image project, which in today's media landscape can often backfire when audiences crave authenticity over perfection. Behind the scenes, insiders reportedly began scrambling to reassess strategy, discussing whether additional clips should be released, interviews scheduled, or marketing angles adjusted in an effort to revive interest. But the early momentum, or lack of it, was already setting the tone. And as one media analyst bluntly put it, first impressions in streaming culture are everything. And when those first numbers disappoint, recovery becomes an uphill battle. At the heart of the issue was a growing realization that Melania Trump's public persona, long defined by mystery and distance, may not automatically translate into widespread audience engagement, especially when viewers feel they've already formed strong opinions about the political era she represents. And while some supporters praised the documentary for its elegance and restraint, critics argued it avoided difficult questions and deeper conflicts that could have made the story more compelling. Adding to the pressure was the fact that this documentary wasn't just a personal project. It was widely seen as a reputational moment, an opportunity to reshape narratives, soften public perception, and perhaps even influence how history would remember Melania's role during one of the most polarizing presidencies in U.S. history, which made the underwhelming response feel not just like a business disappointment, but a symbolic one as well. And as analysts began breaking down the numbers in real time, comparing them to other political documentaries that had either soared or quietly disappeared, a troubling pattern started emerging, suggesting that audiences were becoming increasingly selective about what stories they invest in emotionally. And the question many were now asking was simple but unsettling. Had the moment passed, or had the story simply failed to connect in the way its creators had hoped? As the hours passed and more detailed metrics came in, the situation only grew more concerning. Because while initial curiosity had driven a brief spike in views, engagement dropped sharply afterward, suggesting that many viewers clicked in, watched for a few minutes, and quietly moved on. A pattern that media analysts often interpret as a sign that the opening failed to hold emotional attention. And in a world where streaming platforms reward retention above all else, this was one of the worst possible signals for a high-profile release. Behind the scenes, producers reportedly gathered in emergency-style meetings, poring over heat maps that showed exactly where viewers stopped watching, and what they saw was troubling, because large portions of the audience seemed to drift away during moments that were meant to be powerful, reflective, or revealing, which led some insiders to question whether the storytelling leaned too heavily on surface-level elegance rather than raw human conflict, the very thing that often makes documentaries resonate deeply with audiences. At the same time, media critics began publishing early reviews that, while not entirely negative, consistently echoed similar themes, praising the visuals and production quality, but criticizing the lack of depth, emotional vulnerability, and real confrontation with controversy, with several reviewers noting that the documentary felt more like a carefully curated portrait than an honest exploration of a complex life shaped by extraordinary political turbulence. This reaction struck at the core of what many viewers had hoped for, because the public had long been curious about Melania Trump's inner world, her experiences behind closed doors, and how she navigated the constant storm of political drama surrounding her husband. And instead of revealing new layers, the documentary seemed to maintain the same distance that had always defined her public presence. Social media amplified these criticisms almost instantly, with short clips circulating alongside commentary that questioned whether the film truly offered anything new. And while supporters defended Melania's right to privacy and admired her composed demeanor, others argued that a documentary by nature invites deeper truth, and without that emotional honesty, it risks feeling hollow. What further complicated matters was how expectations had been shaped in the months leading up to the release, with promotional material hinting at moments of vulnerability, unseen struggles, and personal reflection, which created a sense that viewers were about to witness a breakthrough in understanding one of the most enigmatic figures in modern American politics. And when that promise didn't fully materialize, disappointment spread quickly. Insiders close to the project reportedly expressed frustration, feeling that the marketing had oversold the emotional depth of the documentary, setting the bar so high that even a solid production struggled to meet the audience's hopes. And as one source put it quietly, the story wasn't bad, but it wasn't brave enough either. Meanwhile, industry analysts began comparing the documentary's performance to other political and biographical films that had succeeded by embracing controversy and complexity, pointing out that audiences often respond more strongly to stories that acknowledge flaws, tensions, and difficult moments rather than presenting a polished narrative designed to protect an image. As this comparison gained traction, it sparked a wider discussion about how public figures use documentaries as tools for reputation management versus genuine storytelling, and whether modern audiences can easily sense the difference, which many believe they can, especially in an era where authenticity has become one of the most valuable currencies in media. And while the numbers continued to lag behind projections, the broader cultural conversation kept growing louder, shifting from simple viewership disappointment to a deeper critique of how power, image, and storytelling intersect, leaving one pressing question hanging in the air. Was the documentary failing because of who it was about, or because of what it refused to show? As the conversation widened, political commentators began stepping in, each offering their own interpretation of what the documentary's disappointing performance truly represented, with some arguing that it reflected a broader shift in public sentiment away from Trump-era narratives, while others suggested it exposed a long-standing disconnect between Melania Trump's carefully maintained image and the emotional accessibility modern audiences expect from public figures who share their stories on screen. Several analysts pointed out that during Donald Trump's presidency, Melania often remained in the background, rarely giving extended interviews or public speeches that revealed her personal thoughts, which had created both intrigue and distance. And while mystery can sometimes drive curiosity, it can also prevent deeper emotional connection, especially when viewers are later invited to engage with a story meant to feel intimate and revealing. In televised discussions, experts in media psychology noted that audiences tend to bond with personalities who display vulnerability, conflict, and growth, and that without those elements, even the most visually impressive productions can struggle to leave a lasting impression. And in this case, many felt the documentary presented Melania as composed and dignified, but emotionally unreachable, reinforcing the same perception people had held for years. Meanwhile, supporters of Melania Trump pushed back against what they saw as unfair criticism, arguing that her reserved nature had always been part of who she was, and that expecting dramatic emotional revelations was unrealistic and disrespectful, with some praising the documentary for highlighting her resilience under constant public pressure. Yet even among supporters, there was acknowledgement that the film didn't drastically change the narrative surrounding her role in the White House, which had largely been defined by silence, selective appearances, and a preference for privacy over public engagement. As public debate intensified, attention turned toward how this documentary might influence Melania's long-term public legacy, with historians and political analysts suggesting that this was likely one of the most significant opportunities she would have to shape how future generations viewed her time as First Lady. Some argued that by avoiding deeper political and personal controversies, the documentary missed a chance to provide meaningful historical insight into one of the most turbulent periods in modern American politics, while others believed that the choice reflected a conscious effort to remain neutral and protect personal boundaries. Behind closed doors, sources reportedly said that some members of the creative team had initially pushed for a more in-depth approach, hoping to explore the emotional toll of life in the White House, the pressures of global scrutiny, and the complexities of navigating personal identity within a political powerhouse family. But those ideas were allegedly softened during production to maintain a more controlled narrative tone. This revelation added another layer to the story, suggesting that what viewers ultimately saw may have been the result of compromise between authenticity and image management, a tension that frequently arises in documentaries involving powerful public figures. At the same time, data continued showing that while some audiences completed the film and left thoughtful commentary, a significant portion never made it to the end, reinforcing concerns about engagement and emotional resonance. Streaming industry insiders noted that in today's competitive content landscape, even well-known names are no longer enough to guarantee success, and that storytelling quality, honesty, and relatability now play a far greater role in determining whether a project connects with viewers. As these insights circulated, the documentary began to symbolize something larger than just one film's performance. It became a case study in how public perception, media expectations, and narrative control collide in the modern age. And while the initial excitement had faded into mixed reviews and disappointing metrics, the broader conversation about authenticity, power, and storytelling was only growing stronger. As days turned into weeks, the documentary's performance settled into a pattern that no amount of promotional effort seemed able to reverse. And while small spikes appeared whenever new interviews or behind-the-scenes clips were released, the overall trajectory remained far below what industry insiders had projected, creating a growing sense that the project had already reached most of the audience it ever would. Inside media circles, conversations quietly shifted from hope of recovery to damage control, with analysts debating whether the documentary would eventually be remembered as a missed opportunity rather than a cultural moment, and some even suggesting that its underwhelming reception could discourage future large-scale projects centered on Trump-era figures unless they offered far more transparency and emotional depth. Meanwhile, those close to Melania Trump reportedly felt conflicted, believing that the documentary had been crafted with care and dignity, yet realizing that public appetite had moved in a different direction, where raw honesty often outperforms controlled storytelling, even when the subject is deeply personal or controversial. Sources familiar with the reaction described moments of frustration, particularly as headlines increasingly focused on disappointing viewership numbers rather than the content itself, shifting the narrative away from Melania's story and toward the idea of failure, something no creator ever hopes for. This shift had a ripple effect, influencing how commentators frame Melania's role in the public eye, with some suggesting that her long-standing strategy of silence and distance, while effective during politically intense times, may have ultimately limited her ability to connect with audiences when she finally chose to speak through film. Others countered that the public simply wasn't ready to revisit the emotional weight of that era, arguing that fatigue, polarization, and constant political coverage over the years had left viewers craving lighter or more personal content unrelated to past controversies. Still, the documentary's struggles highlighted an undeniable reality about modern storytelling. Audiences don't just want access, they want honesty, complexity, and emotional risk. As conversations continued online, some viewers began sharing moments they felt were the most revealing, pointing to subtle expressions, quiet reflections, and body language that hinted at deeper emotions beneath the polished surface, suggesting that perhaps the documentary offered more than critics were giving it credit for, just in a quieter, more restrained way. But in the fast-moving world of digital media, subtlety often gets overshadowed by bold, dramatic storytelling, and many felt that the film's calm tone failed to compete with the intense narratives audiences had grown accustomed to. At the same time, rumors circulated about internal disagreements during production, with some creative voices allegedly pushing for a grittier approach that explored tensions within the White House, the strain of constant public judgment, and moments of personal doubt, while others prioritized maintaining privacy and control over how sensitive topics were portrayed. Though never officially confirmed, these reports fueled speculation that what viewers saw was only a softened version of a much deeper story that might never be told in full. This idea fascinated audiences, leading many to wonder what moments had been left on the cutting room floor, what conversations were edited out, and how different the documentary might have felt if those raw elements had been included. As curiosity about the unseen grew, so did criticism about narrative restraint. And while Melania Trump herself remained silent on the film's reception, the absence of response only added to the mystery surrounding her true feelings about the project's outcome. Some believed she was disappointed, but choosing grace, while others speculated that the documentary had never been intended to chase massive viewership, but rather to present her story on her own terms. Yet in the world of streaming and public opinion, numbers often become the loudest voice. By the time the documentary had been out for several weeks, the initial shock surrounding the numbers had slowly transformed into a more reflective conversation about what the entire situation revealed. Not just about Melania Trump, but about the evolving relationship between public figures and modern audiences, because in many ways, the film became a mirror of a much larger shift in cultural expectations, where polished narratives were no longer enough to hold attention without emotional honesty driving the story forward. Some political historians began suggesting that Melania's experience was emblematic of a generation of public figures who built their image around privacy and composure in an era that now rewards openness and vulnerability. And while that approach once conveyed strength and dignity, it now risks creating distance in a media environment where audiences crave relatability above all else. Behind closed doors, industry insiders reportedly admitted that the documentary had been designed to carefully balance storytelling with personal boundaries, but that balance may have tipped too far toward caution, resulting in a narrative that felt safe rather than powerful, controlled rather than revealing, and in trying to protect an image, it may have unintentionally weakened its emotional impact. At the same time, supporters continued to emphasize that Melania Trump had endured intense public scrutiny throughout her years in the White House, often facing criticism for choices that were sometimes misunderstood or exaggerated, and they argued that the documentary's calm tone reflected resilience rather than avoidance, presenting a woman who navigated extraordinary pressure with quiet strength. Yet even among those voices, there was growing recognition that audiences had wanted something more raw, more personal insight into moments of fear, conflict, and emotional struggle that naturally accompany life at the center of global attention. As streaming platforms analyzed the performance further, experts pointed out that modern viewers are increasingly drawn to stories that feel unpredictable, where tension rises, secrets unfold, and characters evolve in visible ways. And when those elements are absent, even the most high-profile releases can fade quickly. This realization sparked broader discussions across the entertainment industry about how documentaries involving political figures should be approached in the future, with many suggesting that authenticity, even when uncomfortable, is now essential for true engagement. Meanwhile, Melania Trump's documentary began to take on symbolic meaning beyond its immediate success or failure, representing the challenge of reshaping public perception after years of intense media coverage and the difficulty of controlling a narrative in an era where audiences hold immense power in determining what stories resonate. Some commentators argued that no documentary could have truly satisfied everyone, given how deeply polarized opinions about the Trump era remain, and that any attempt to present a balanced or restrained narrative was bound to face criticism from both sides. Others believe the project could have bridged divides had it leaned more fully into emotional truth rather than image preservation. As these debates unfolded, the documentary's numbers stabilized at levels that confirmed it would not become the cultural phenomenon many had anticipated, but instead remain a niche piece of content primarily viewed by those already invested in political history or the Trump family's story. Yet even in its struggle, the film succeeded in reigniting conversations about Melania Trump's role, her silence, and the complexities of being a public figure tied to one of the most controversial presidencies in modern history. And in some ways, that may have been its greatest impact, not in viewership milestones, but in reopening dialogue about a woman who had long remained on the sidelines of public discussion. As analysts looked ahead, many wondered whether this experience would shape how Melania approached future public projects, or whether it would reinforce her preference for privacy over public storytelling. The documentary's reception served as a reminder that in today's media world, even carefully planned narratives can take unexpected turns once released into the hands of viewers. As the dust slowly settled and the headlines began shifting toward newer stories, the legacy of the documentary took on a quieter but deeper significance because while it never reached the massive audience many had predicted, it left behind an important lesson about storytelling in the modern era, one that extends far beyond Melania Trump herself and speaks to how power, image, and authenticity now collide in public life. In the end, what seemed to unsettle viewers the most wasn't just the lower-than-expected numbers, but the feeling that they had been invited into a story that stopped just short of true emotional revelation, and in a time when audiences have become skilled at sensing when narratives are carefully managed, that restraint stood out more than the elegance of the production itself. Some cultural commentators later described the documentary as a portrait of control, beautifully filmed, thoughtfully paced, but emotionally guarded, reflecting the same reserved persona Melania had maintained throughout her public life. And while that consistency was admirable in many ways, it also reinforced the emotional distance that had long defined public perception. Others took a more sympathetic view, suggesting that perhaps expecting a deeply personal confession from someone who had spent years protecting her privacy was unrealistic, and that the documentary should be seen as a quiet expression of strength rather than a dramatic unveiling of hidden struggles. Still, when measured against modern documentary successes that embraced vulnerability and complex storytelling, the contrast was impossible to ignore. What became clear through all the analysis, debate, and reflection was that audiences today aren't just consuming stories. They're searching for connection, emotional truth, and narratives that feel real rather than refined. The film's struggles highlighted how difficult it is for public figures to shift perception once an image has been firmly established, especially when that image has been shaped by years of silence, limited access, and controlled appearances. For Melania Trump, the documentary may not have delivered the dramatic reset some hoped for, but it did solidify her identity as a figure who remains deeply private, even when given a platform to speak. And perhaps that, in itself, was the most honest takeaway of all. Rather than transforming into a new public persona, she remained consistent with who she has always been: composed, distant, and protective of her inner world. Whether that approach resonates with future audiences remains to be seen. But the broader impact of the documentary reaches into the heart of modern media culture, where viewers increasingly demand transparency, emotional risk, and genuine storytelling, especially from those connected to power and controversy. The era of polished image projects dominating public opinion appears to be fading, replaced by a hunger for stories that embrace imperfection and conflict. As streaming platforms continue to shape what stories succeed and which quietly disappear, Melania Trump's documentary will likely be remembered not as a failure, but as a turning point, a moment that revealed just how much the rules of engagement have changed. And for creators, politicians, and public figures alike, the message is clear. Authenticity now matters more than presentation. In a world overflowing with content, only stories that feel real manage to truly break through. So, while the numbers may have sparked panic behind the scenes, they also sparked something far more meaningful: a cultural conversation about honesty, connection, and the future of storytelling. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that no matter how powerful the name, how big the promotion, or how carefully the narrative is crafted, in the end, it's the audience that decides what truly resonates. If you found this breakdown insightful, thought-provoking, or surprising, share your thoughts below. Join the conversation, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dive stories that reveal what's really happening behind the headlines. Tonight, everything changes. A documentary about Melania Trump has dropped, and the numbers, the reactions, the behind-the-scenes secrets, they're shocking. From untold struggles inside the White House to decisions and tensions that nobody has ever seen, this film reveals a side of the First Lady the world thought they knew, but didn't. Panic is spreading in media circles, critics are debating every frame, and viewers are asking the same question: what was really happening behind the cameras? Stay with us, because in the next few minutes, you'll see the truth, the conflicts, and the hidden moments that could rewrite the story of Melania Trump forever. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, share your review in the comments, and make sure to watch the video till the end so you don't miss anything important.